course.
Great. Good morning. At this time, I'd like to convene the meeting of the City School Liaison Committee for Thursday, May 20th. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Yes, of course. Chair Burt.
Here.
Board President Darab.
Here.
Board Member DiBrienza.
Here.
Councilmember Tanaka.
Here.
4 present.
Thank you. Our first order of business is oral communications, where the public is welcome to speak on any item that is not otherwise on the agenda. And do we have any speakers?
Yes, please raise your hand in the Zoom app or press *9 to participate in oral communications. And currently we have 1 speaker.
Okay, and the speakers will have 2 minutes to speak.
Yes, so our first speaker is Palo Verde parent. If you can please unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes for public comment.
Hello, I'd like to speak about the safe parking program in Palo Alto. As far as I'm aware, it's not on the agenda for today. As we know, homelessness is a huge issue for this area. This commendable program aims to provide a safe place for vehicle dwellers to park overnight. I and other parents support the goals of the SPP and would like to see it succeed. However, in its present form, there are some compounding shortcomings which will directly affect the school community. Number 1, there is currently no statutory cap on the number of programs in South Palo Alto. 2 programs are currently or conditionally approved: Highway Church, which is approximately 0.4 miles from Palo Verde and Fairmeadow, and the Unitarian Universalist Church, which is 350 feet from Hoover and within a ½ mile of JLS and Fairmeadow. 2 nearby churches are also in the process of applying. There are 13 churches within 1 mile of Mitchell Park, and they are all relatively close to Palo Verde, Hoover, Fairmeadow, or JLS. These churches are allowed up to 4 cars per lot. If all 13 churches apply, that would be 52 cars potentially parking in the same concentrated geographical area. During the daytime, vehicles are supposed to park more than a ½ mile from the program site, but this rule will not be enforced. Without any limit to the number of applicants within an area, what impact might it have on the nearby schools and children commuting to school? Number 2, unlike the majority of other safe parking programs in California and Santa Clara County, Palo Alto's SPP does not screen for sex offenders or recent violent felons. Palo Alto is the exception, and we would like to explore why. This is especially important because unlike most other programs, Palo Alto's SPP sites are in close proximity to schools. We would like the board to consider these 2 issues and explore their impact on the safety of students and the school community. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Grace Ma, followed by, or that will be our final speaker, in fact. Ms. Grace Ma, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes for public comment.
Hey, thank you very much. I'm also speaking about the safe parking program, and I wanted to bring up the concern that the Palo Verde parent already mentioned, that it is a concern that we have a number of programs potentially which are near schools in South Palo Alto. So I would like to have the City School Liaison Committee consider getting back to the City Council on having some kind of limit as far as the number that are allowed in the South Palo Alto area and to look at having a more equitable distribution of programs across the whole city. And since it is a pilot program, that this is the time that we should put some kind of limit, I would think, as far as trying it out first and being able to get results before we implement a permanent program or something that would be much more extensive. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And Chair Burt, that was our final speaker.
Great, thank you. Our next item is approval of minutes. We have first carryover minutes from December 17th and the prior composition of this body, and we had agreed that we would do some YouTube review for those of us who were not participants, and so I think we're prepared to vote on them. So why don't we take the three groups of minutes as three sets of minutes as one group, and vote on them as a set unless anyone objects. All right, so I will move approval. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Chair Burt, but I do want to recommend also taking public comment or requesting
great.
that the
Thank
public.
you. So I will open this item to members of the public for comment.
Yes, if you'd like to speak on item 2 for the minutes approval, please raise your hand in the Zoom app or press *9. And we have no speakers for this item.
Great, thank you. So I move the approval of the minutes from December 17th, 2020, March 25th, 2021, and April 15th, 2021.
Is that a second? I'll second that.
Excellent. All right. Can the clerk please call the roll?
Yes, of course. Chair Burt,
Yes.
Board President Darab,
Yes.
Board Member DiBrienza,
Yes.
Councilmember Tanaka.
Yes.
This motion passed unanimously.
Hooray. Finally got that December minutes through. All right. So our next item is updates from the superintendent and the city manager, and then update on the recent city council and PAUSD board meetings, and an update on the Coverley ad hoc group. We can go ahead and take public comments at the beginning of this item, if any members of the public wish to speak to it.
Yes, if any member of the public would like to speak on item 3 regarding these updates, please raise your hand on the Zoom app or press *9. And we have no speakers for this item, Chair Burt.
Great. Well, then I'd like to turn it over first to Superintendent Austin, I think, unless City Manager Shikata has any time competition.
No time competition. Happy to follow Superintendent.
Great.
Okay, thank you. This will be pretty quick. Our team was able to serve as a vaccination clinic site on Sunday at Palo High School. Well attended, about 1,000 vaccinations.
Wow.
Done overwhelmingly for students ages 12 and up. But at the end, we were able to even bring in some people because we had some extra vaccinations. So that was a fantastic activity and good community event. Our end of the year activities are coming up. Graduation and promotion are planned to be really pretty nice. And we modeled part of the seating after Stanford's movie nights that they're doing in the amphitheater. Seating families in pods predetermined. So it's actually a great model, and it's going to allow us to get right up to, capacities that would have been pretty close to what we would have had in a normal year by just rethinking the way we're doing the seating. We are gearing up for a full return in the fall, and some recent things from the legislature make that look like the right move as they phase out distance learning. We have tentative agreements for all of our employees going to the school board on Tuesday for consideration. And of note, CSEA, PAEA, which are our teachers, and our PAMA group, which are all non-contracted administrative positions, are looking at 2-year deals, which is great for us to be able to knock out this year and next year. In a basic aid district, the cycles of the way the money comes back to us are different than non-basic aid districts. So to be able to do this is really a big deal. And then finally, we had an issue with a student that was in crisis over the weekend on Friday and Saturday. And I just want to thank our Palo Alto Police Department for their partnership and their continued work with us throughout the weekend. And ultimately, we located the student and I think averted something that could have been really bad. But as always, would like to thank our police department. That's it for me.
Thank you. And Mr. City Manager.
Thank you. Just making note of the appreciation for the police department. I will pass along gladly from PAUSD. Actually, in terms of manager's comments, I think the only items we have Deputy City Manager Cotton Gaines can report on. So Chantal, please take it away.
Yes, thank you. Just one quick update. We had been speaking previously about if there were wireless projects planned anywhere near schools, and I have information from Director Late that he will be sending an alert to the school district and the superintendent probably tomorrow. Today's Thursday, so probably tomorrow this week, about one that's just really, I think it's 530 feet or something from one of the schools. So an application that has come in. So wanted to bring that awareness to this committee just because I know that that is something of interest to the school district. And that's our main update that is forthcoming. And just really briefly too, on the questions on safe parking, we are looking at one site that started operating yesterday, and we're watching that site and how it works. And we'll be bringing back the longer term ordinance to the council probably after the break, sometime in the fall. It'll give us some time to see how the pilot is working. And that's it for us.
Thank you. Well, it sounds like you're leaving the very extensive budget discussions we had up to the council members to present. We'll give it our best.
That's small thing.
Yeah. Great. So board members, do you have updates you'd like to share?
Mr. Drop, would you like me to go or just?
Please go ahead.
Well, I guess you can back me up since your agenda setting. You'll mention the things that I forget. Yeah, we've got 3 more meetings before we close out for the year, and as Dr. Austin said, commencement's coming up really soon. So we're really digging deeply into our plans for next fall, our full return. Next week there's going to be a big presentation on our big push for literacy and closing the achievement gap when it comes to early literacy, which is great. We're just finishing up our budget discussions for the year. I think we're super close to passing that. We've been working on that several times over the course of this year, and that's pretty finalized for us. And I think that's it. Shanik, is there anything else?
I was just going to add the classroom tech refresh project, which may be of interest, which is, you may hear complaints from family members. Actually, the perennial complaint is always, why does my classroom look like it did why does my kid's classroom look like it did when I was growing up? And admittedly, a lot of the classrooms have looked the same as when I went there, which, wasn't that long ago, but it was over 10 years. Anyways, the classroom refresh project, the tech refresh is huge, and basically retrofitting these classrooms and making them, appropriate for where we are technologically, but also bearing in mind the changes that the things we've learned from remote learning, right? The things that work, that don't work, how to seamlessly integrate technology into learning, which is, I think, something that has historically always been a little bit of a tension, right? How much do you integrate technology versus how much do you need to, focus on the students and sort of pen to paper. And obviously the professionals in the district are on top of that, but in terms of, perception and ease of access and lowering barriers to entry for the use of this technology, getting technology out to students in their homes. I mean, we've all been doing that, but the refresh project is I think a huge leap towards that goal. So it's
thank you for mentioning that one. Yeah, it's exciting new stuff.
Great. And if I can ask a question, as you're transitioning back to in-person learning and all that we've kind of been trying to get a beat on, what's been the impact on youth of the academic impact of the last year and a quarter, and the youth well-being and mental health aspects. What are you seeing in terms of catch-up or responses that you need to do to now begin to compensate for? Yeah, Jennifer?
I'm laughing because there's a totally easy answer to that. Yeah, it runs the gamut. It's completely, there are some kids that have totally thrived not having to deal with the social interactions on a school campus. There are some kids that are super isolated and struggling. There are some kids who have made much more than a year's gain in the year that they weren't in campus, and other kids who we're not too sure because they don't log in very much despite our best efforts. So our guess is, I think Dr. Austin said the other day, I think our best guess is to not even guess until we actually have them back. But I think it's pretty clear that some kids have really struggled and that some kids have really thrived. It's giving us an opportunity to think about, for those kids that have really thrived, what is it about the shutdown that gave them the space to thrive, and how can we re-engage them socially while still capitalizing on that opportunity for them. And for the kids who we probably won't know what the academic status is until they're actually back on campus and we're doing assessments, and we're probably, some will be summer school, but a lot will be in August. We'll have some catch up to do. And we're hoping that, you know, with enrollment going down a little bit, it might go back up because it went down a lot last year when the shutdown happened. But I think we're well positioned, that we are staffed well. And so if we need extra supports along the way, I think we're ready to provide those. Anybody have a different answer than that?
Exactly what my answer is going to be, although better stated.
Great. And can you refresh us on both your board break dates and when you return to school?
Yeah, so we have 2 more board meetings, right? We have 2 more board meetings. 3 more board
next
meetings.
week, and then 2
That's right. So with 3 more board meetings, and then we technically break, although I think that some of the board committees will be meeting or at least having some work. That'll depend on staff availability. I know staff is going to be out in July. Dr. Austin can give you more specific dates than that. But yeah, we're generally on break then. But of course, board members are going to be accessible. So to the extent there are discussions that Pat or Mr. Burrett, you or other council members would like to have with us, and we're always going to be available for that.
Great.
And the first day of school is August 11th, Wednesday, August 11th for the high school, and Thursday, August 12th for the elementary school.
Wow. Is that even the earliest yet you've started?
I think it is.
Yeah.
Feels kind of early to me.
Yeah. All right, great. So in terms of city council updates, Councilmember Tanaka, did you want to provide any first?
No, thank you.
So then I'll take a crack at it, because we've been in a busy and challenging period. What matters probably most to this committee is all of our budget struggles. We, after having last year, had probably the most precipitous drop in revenues in a single year that we've had in at least 50 years, I think. We then went into this year anticipating that we would potentially have additional cuts on top of the 37 million I think we had in operations last year. We went through, our finance committee had with staff 2 marathon all-day sessions, and through that process, and during that we had a little bit of welcome news that our federal dollars, bailout dollars for over the next 2 years were refined in terms of understanding the number. It went from 12.5 million to 13.7. We also got a little bit of favorable news on some of the revenue side, that our property tax looks like it'll be flat rather than drop. And then we looked at some other ways to bridge short-term revenue gaps, and had kind of a philosophical divide on whether we should be using short-term dollars to bridge gaps, or that short-term dollars should only be for one-time expenses. And so we restored the vast majority of the additional cuts for this year, but we were not able to restore the very deep cuts that were made last year. The council then met on Monday, and we were able to restore a few of the cuts that were made last year. In some of that, we really focused to a great deal in those on essential services for youth and other social services. So we opted to increase our HISREP funding to social service providers above what we ever spent on that, and devoting some of the federal relief dollars toward that purpose, under the theme of those dollars were intended to both help us prevent deeper cuts for services and to respond to any special needs that have emerged as a result of the pandemic. So the council gave the Finance Committee additional direction, and the Finance Committee meets next week with staff to follow up and attempt to refine the budget and then return to the council for its final approval. And I think as we get into the last topic area on the collaborations, I can use that as kind of a way to point out where the city has still had to have severe cuts that are carried over from last year, that are really ones that many of them are important to youth and families, whether it be things like the children's library. We were able to restore. We were looking at the possibility of keeping it completely closed. What we were able to do is return it to 2 days a week, but not the 5 days a week. Our children's theater was able to avoid deeper cuts, but we weren't able to restore most of the cuts from last year, although the council on Monday did restore some of those programs for a partial summer outdoor, what do we call it, hot dog supper series, or whatever it's called, where we can readily be outdoors. We have other art programs, that the library hours in general, a whole series of things that the community has historically expected to be provided and are no longer services we're scheduled to provide. Shuttle programs, for instance, we have no return of the shuttle program yet. So we're still in probably the worst economic shape we've been as a city in 50 years, but we have gone through other tough times in the Great Recession, the dot-com bust, and otherwise that were similar, but probably not as severe. And now we're looking at what pace will we see the recovery. We have maybe the same set of data, and among council members, different perspectives on how conservative we should be versus how much we should be trying to bridge a 2-year period of downturns with funding that is just bridge funding to the extent we can. There's no way we're going to be able to fully restore our programs, even with that principle of using bridge funding. And so we're still in very challenging times, I guess, is the bottom line. And our recovery will, in all likelihood, take several years, up to 5 years, perhaps less than that. We're all in uncharted waters here. My experience in this valley has been that when we're in these types of deep recessions, the tendency is to think of them as a new normal. And within a couple of years, we realized they weren't new normals. They were very difficult transition periods. But nobody knows the future. So that's what we're facing right now. And I'd be glad to answer any questions on this if anyone has any. Yeah, Jennifer.
I'm not sure if you're asking us something or breaking some bad news to us or something. I mean, our budget's done for the year.
Yeah.
You mentioned the children's library and the children's theater, which some of our children take advantage of for sure, but all kids in Palo Alto and surrounding towns do. So I don't know if there's like a question or if you're just sharing some challenging news with us or what.
Well, most of all, it's to share our reality and where we are and what we're still struggling with, and that some of that hasn't had its final resolution. We have another finance committee meeting, and then the council approval of the budget and any refinements that the council as a whole will do. We basically had on Monday, the 7-member council took several positions that were more aggressive at trying to restore some services than the finance committee did as a majority. So it's still a fluid situation in that regard. I think that in the next item part of it, what we want to make sure that we have a fuller kind of sharing with you of the programs that affect youth and families that were cut last year and to a great degree weren't visible because so many things were shut down, and it's only this year that it's going to be apparent how severe those cuts were. So yeah, it's mostly sharing our situation, and then would welcome maybe in that context, that next item, just any discussions we'd like to have and follow-ups we should have on what are the implications of those cuts and if there's anything that we can do to mitigate them.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah, you bet. And then we have an update from our Coverly ad hoc group as the final part of this agenda item. And I don't know who is prepared to provide that info. If anyone.
I can speak to that.
Yeah.
So we've now had two meetings with just the council members and the board members who are on that committee, working to frame up what the committee is going to look like, what its purpose will be, what the relationship is going to be, because I think those are difficult questions. We've had a lot of different perspectives on that in both our bodies and among our bodies on what that relationship is. And so we've had those discussions. We're ultimately at a point now where the committee is open to discussing and exploring ideas on what Coverly will look like. I've expressed that I've expressed the school board's position, which it's taken through board action, setting aside 3 priorities. That was taken in 2019. But I've also expressed, and it's my own personal opinion, that there may be a appetite among the board to revisit those priorities in light of the change in circumstances since early 2019. Other folks on the committee have discussed, where we left off in terms of the co-design process and where we were then versus where we are now. I think there's been a little bit of attempts to divine what the intent was of the ad hoc committee. And I think we've attributed a lot of intent to Ed and Don. And so we're going to be bringing them on starting in the next meeting so we can sort of hear, we have some continuity and context. But I think we're in there have been very productive meetings. And I think we've set the groundwork for what I expect to be an extremely productive relationship with information going back to our respective bodies fairly soon and potentially requests for input from the bodies as a unit.
Great. And, the changes in your enrollment that you alluded to earlier, I realized that there's one other update from the council that has bearing on that I should share. So we've been going through our response to the RENA process, which is the regional housing allocation, which our previous allocation was around 2,000 units over an 8-year period. We are at or above the pace for market rate units and below it for moderate and low income because those are categories that for the most part need subsidies. And we've spent all the funding that we have to subsidize those kinds of projects. And so that's the dilemma we're in. We have been assigned a tripling of that number to 6,000 units, with somewhere near half of those low and moderate income. And the dollars that would be necessary to subsidize that are really overwhelming. The council has discussed and intends to bring back forward a prospective business tax, which when it was last being considered was looking at funding both transportation and affordable housing. The council is also looking at whether at bringing back an update to commercial development impact fees, including for affordable housing. And so we have some potential to increase our funding for those functions, but even with those even if we had a tripling of the funding available for affordable housing, it would be nowhere near enough to meet the allocation that the RENA requirement is. So it's a real dilemma, in some ways kind of a trap door for cities, because now failure to meet those mandates has real teeth and removal of local zoning authority. And so cities are being assigned numbers that are virtually infeasible to meet and with significant consequences for not meeting them. And then the other thing that I've been raising related to that is that the way those mandates are set up, they count all housing units alike. So a micro unit studio counts the same as a townhome for a family. And since cities are being driven to produce the number of residences mandated, it creates a disincentive to provide family housing. And a concern is that we're going to have a skewing in our future growth, where we're not going to have the balance of housing types for all types of residents, from single adults or single seniors to young couples to families, that we're going to be skewed, and the market is incentivized to move in that direction of very small units. Even within our own zoning that we had set up to incentivize housing, which we significantly upzoned much of the city for housing over the last couple of years, we saw a project coming forward on Tuesday that is for a lot of small units. And what we realized is that the ability for them to meet our inclusionary housing is much easier if they have small units than if they have larger units. So we ourselves have set up sort of a disincentive while trying to increase the amount of inclusionary housing. Jennifer, did you want to weigh in on that, or?
No, I'm just probably as distressed as you are about housing in Palo Alto right now, and the rejection of still more plans coming up in front of us. As you state, it's very complicated. I'm just discouraged.
Well, that's a deeper discussion we can have. So, excuse me. So I think that concludes our coverly item. And so we have the final material item for the meeting, which is the city and school collaboration follow-up discussion. And Ms. Gaines had sent out a document that tried to capture more of these areas where we have shared efforts and things. And can you share that on your screen, Ms. Gaines, if possible? Thank you. And while she's doing that, we can open this item for public comment if anyone would like to speak on item number 4.
Yes, if anyone would like to speak on this item regarding city-school collaborations, please raise your hand on the Zoom app or press *9. And currently we have Miss Penny Elson, who will be our first speaker, followed by Jeremy Ehrman. Miss Elson, if you can unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes for public comment.
Good morning, thank you. I checked in today because I saw Cubberley was on your agenda. I live in the neighborhood right next door to Cubberley Community Center. And I was very involved in the last Cubberley Community Advisory Committee, the last 2 committees actually. There are 2 concerns that I have. I mean, one is that people were very surprised by the addition of housing to the project. And I frankly am not certain that housing on top of a community center and school district site makes a lot of sense from an operations perspective for a lot of reasons that I won't go into because I only have 2 minutes. But what I do want to point you to is I'm also having worked on traffic around high schools and middle schools for many, many years. I understand very well what the traffic impacts of a center of this size and a school of the proposed size is going to create. And there's been no discussion at all about incorporating plans with the project plans for mitigating the traffic impacts of this really massive development on the nearby neighborhoods and school commute routes. Nelson Drive, Charleston or Astrodero is about to be completed, but Middlefield Road and Montrose, these are all streets that, and Fern are all, and Mackey are all streets that children use for commuting to school in the nearby neighborhoods. And they will certainly be impacted by motor vehicle traffic. And I really think that that needs to be part of the discussions for this project going forward. I've been saying that since the get-go. Staff promised it would get done, and it's been, you know, almost a year and we've heard nothing. So I just wanted to weigh in with this committee and say, this is a big concern of the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jeremy Ehrman, and that is our final speaker. Jeremy, if you can please unmute yourself, you'll have 2 minutes for public comment.
Thank you. Good morning. I wanted to remind the committee that one of the items that was recently added to the collaboration memo was the Palo Alto Children's Theater Outreach Program. If anyone's not completely familiar with the program, it is a program whereby children's theater staff would come into the elementary schools and then rehearse and then perform theater performances at the elementary schools so that the elementary school students would be able to have a theater experience in familiar surroundings with familiar people. It's been going on since I think the early 80s. I actually once saw the document which created Outreach. It was called something like Outreach, the Great Experiment. And the city and the theater put a lot of effort into creating this program to fill the gap of a lack of theater in the elementary schools, since there are such strong programs traditionally in the middle schools and high schools in Palo Alto. So I really would encourage the city and the school district to work together to find some way to keep this program going. It's not entirely certain right now if the city has funds for it. I think they did talk about adding funds back in for this program. It was cut last year since there was a pandemic. So I think people are really hoping that it could come back in some form this year. So if there's any kind of collaboration that can happen between the city and the school district, I think that would be a really good thing. I think it's important to remember that while some of these programs like this might seem very additional to some people, that there has been throughout the pandemic a huge focus on athletic activities, on physical activities, on a real push, like politically, from the state level, the county level, to get these things going. But the arts have extremely been ignored. So for all those, you know, hundreds of students that prefer the arts to sports and don't do sports, I think it's really important to keep the arts programs going. So I really urge you to find some way. It can be creative ways to keep the outreach program going. Thank you.
Thank you. And Chair Burt, that was our final speaker.
Great, thank you. And Ms. Gaines, you ready to take over the screen?
Can you see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
There you go.
So I don't know if everyone got a chance to look at this yesterday, but it's an update on kind of this outline of the different programs. And you could scroll down a little bit. And as when we were first embarking on kind of this discussion on just looking at our shared missions, it was more in a longer term strategic context. I realize now that it's probably helpful for our discussion to identify which of these are basically dormant, or I don't know what's the best descriptor of programs that we had historically been able to provide and we aren't right now. And so maybe that's going to be part of the interest in this discussion, is to have kind of two layers to it. One is the long-term strategic, and then the other is just to make sure everybody's aware of which of these are functioning at this this year and which are not scheduled to be. I should have mentioned too in our budget discussion that as we wrap up the budget, we may have some funding that is unallocated, and that was the case last year, that the city had city manager, I think it was $1 million in the COVID emergency fund. How many dollars were in that?
It was about 700,000.
700,000. So there may be an opportunity or an inclination, rather than try to figure out in the next 2 weeks which of last year's cuts we might be able to restore just a few more of them, and it's certainly not going to be anywhere near the majority of them. But maybe the best way to do that, I am interested in discussing with my colleagues, is whether to set aside some funds in a COVID recovery fund so that the council can respond in the next 2 months or so and throughout the year with responding to what would be the most strategic ways to utilize the limited dollars that we still might have available, and to be able to respond to emerging circumstances. Does our economy recover more rapidly than we're projecting, or what we're projecting, or is there some form of a setback? So that's kind of an overlay for these programs. We have been able to, on the first one, on the Safe Routes to School, and I guess I'm going to look toward the city manager to wade in on clarifying. He has, I think, a better encyclopedic understanding of the most recent movements in the budget. But I believe Safe Routes to School, we've retained all funding for. Is that correct?
I believe that's, to your point, in terms of, well, I would put your encyclopedia ahead of mine anytime. But that said, I think the outcome of the council discussion on restoration, I do believe puts it back. Although, in fact, we've got the Safe Routes to School staff here, so they may want to chime in if that's in any way incorrect.
Great. I guess Sylvia is probably the expert in this.
Or Philip, either, please.
Philip. Oh, both are here. Great.
Philip had to drop off. Oh, Sylvia. Okay.
Hi, good morning. We have, there were cuts to to some salary, Safe Routes to School salary, which we've backfilled with grant funds. I'm not clear on whether or not the recent council motions have backfilled that. But we do have grant funds to sustain staff.
Just for clarification there, the budget doesn't actually cut salaries. It may cut positions, but it doesn't cut salaries, just to be clear. Yeah, Philip, go ahead.
Sorry, apologies. I'm actually was double dipping in meetings here. So I was on a call related to TMA. So I appreciate Sylvia jumping in there.
So the question, Philip, was whether the recent Finance Committee and Council discussions have now restored the Safe Routes to School program as previously existing, or if there remains a shortfall.
Well, so the answer is no. It's over $100,000 less of a program than we would deliver in a normal Safe Routes to School cycle, and we have in the past.
So that would be maybe 2 years back as opposed to last year. I know there was, the Vice Mayor had noted last year we made cuts and then this year additional cuts. So I think you're referring to back in when we were in person, right? Understood.
That's correct, yeah.
And on that program, it's my assumption that given that the schools have essentially, we didn't have that program and training of students last year. In some ways, there's a catch-up that's needed to have two different groups of students who are getting their first training periods and things like that. I'm not an expert on that. I saw Penny Elson was on the call earlier, and if anybody knows the details, it's Penny. So that's something that we may all want to bear in mind is what's the gap between what we have and what may be not just a return to normal level, but a catch-up, which is aligned with what we were talking about earlier on what's happened from kids being in hibernation for a year. Committee members, please feel free to jump in at any time on any of this. So the next thing was the school crossing guards. That was one of the programs that we were looking to cut by 50% this year, and the council made a decision, and this is in part by a willingness to utilize a portion of our reserves and other kind of bridge funding mechanisms. The council made the decision to fully restore the crossing guards. We simply thought it was such a critical item of public and child safety that it just had to be prioritized despite other cuts that we were having to make. The shuttle buses were, that whole program was put in suspension last year, and we have no action to begin to return that. As you're aware, it really, its primary service are for students in the morning and afternoon, and kind of cross town, more for folks like seniors who have more limited transportation opportunities during the day. Other people do use it, but those are probably the two primary purposes. And there's always been a lot of support for the shuttle program on the council, and even an interest over time in trying to expand it. Unfortunately, we don't have the resources right now to return it. And one of the issues related to this is how it intersects with the bus service that is provided by VTA. And one of the things that has been discussed for a long while is whether, as VTA pull back on bus service in Palo Alto in the North County, whether there could be some negotiation to help have VTA help fund local shuttle programs. That doesn't exist yet. I'm on the VTA board now, and it's one of the things that I hope to pursue. I'm not counting on success, but anything we can do to get the shuttle service at least back at a partial level as soon as possible, I think is important to the community. Mr. City Manager.
Yes, Vice Mayor, I think it might be helpful to ask Mr. Cami to speak to what's happening with the shuttle, given the, I think, somewhat progress we have with respect to VTA grant funding.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, just this past week, we received our grant agreement from VTA. So we've received a $2 million grant for a what's called an innovative transit grant. So that won't restore our prior shuttle service, but it's going to allow us to create a new service, which is essentially an on-demand microtransit type service. So that's kind of if you would consider like a Lyft or Uber type service, but with buses. So it's more door-to-door type service. So envision setting up that service as a pilot over 2 years using the funding that we've received from VTA.
Right, and so my understanding was that was more oriented toward those who are reliant on transportation as their public transit as their really only mode of transportation, those with disabilities and seniors. But do you anticipate that it would also help backfill any of the school kids who were using our shuttle program previously?
So to answer your question, yes, I believe that it will possibly, although we're still looking into how we set it up and develop it. Can I note one more thing actually earlier regarding the safe routes to school? You noted that Penny's not here to talk about the safe routes to school that occurred, but I just wanted to mention that there was actually education that did occur over the last year.
Just to note, Penny is here, and I'm sorry, Penny's here and her hand is up. So I don't know if you actually.
Oh, okay. So Penny probably does want to talk about it, but I was just going to mention that we did provide education to the students. Still, we did it virtually, and so it's a little bit different. We didn't do like bike rodeos in person, and kids didn't get with us on the bikes, but we actually reached more students than we usually would virtually.
Great. Yeah, so given the informality of this committee and things, if Penny has her hand up, I'd welcome her input on this important program. So she can be enabled.
Good morning again. Thank you. And now I've had some coffee, so I'll be a little more succinct. First, I want to give a huge shout out to city staff for what I consider to be an absolutely heroic lift, creating and delivering online programming to students over the course of the COVID period. I have been watching them work, and their job there has been amazing. So thank you. I can't say that enough. On the subject of shuttles, I just want to remind everybody that the shuttles were partly funded by Caltrain. So I would like to understand, is there any possibility that the shuttles as we once knew them that served Palo and Jordan might be coming back? I actually don't know the answer to that question. So I'd sort of like to hear from staff about that. I know that the bus service, the VTA bus 288 bus service that serves Gunn High School has been, they said, temporarily cut because of lack of use by students. And I'm curious about what we've heard from VTA about restoration of that service next school year. They had said that they would restore it, but I don't know if steps have been taken yet to make sure that we get that back. And then I am also curious about this micro transit grant, the transit grant that you were just talking about. I hear that it's for 2 years. And one thing that I do know is that federal dollars for transit are tied to dedicated bike lane, or excuse me, dedicated bus service, like the 88, the 288, the 22, the 522 bus lines. So paratransit is tied in a way to these bus routes. So I'm curious whether or not paratransit is tied to this on-demand microtransit that we're now talking about. And I'd also like to point out that the bus routes are more permanent. It's not tied to a 2-year grant. So if we lose, I'm wondering what this all means. I mean, I think we would need to really be fighting for these bus routes, number one, and number two, I want to make sure that the students who've been delivered service at Gunn and Pally and Jordan will continue to get, and a few at JLS will continue to get the shuttle service that they need, or something like it. And a 2-year time frame is a little worrisome to me. That's a pretty short time frame. It doesn't really replace what we're going to need for the long term. So I have a bunch of questions about the transit piece. Thank you.
Thank you. Philip, any follow-up?
Yeah, I'd be happy to speak to some of those. And apologies if I don't get these in order, but just to note that the VTA has told us that they are restoring the service next year. We haven't heard differently, but we will continue to bug them and make sure that it does get restored if that's within our control. Just to note, one of our, we had 2 shuttle routes previously, and one of those was partially funded by Caltrain or the Joint Powers Board. So yeah, at current, we don't have funding to consider restoring the shuttle routes. But as you mentioned, what we do have is 2 years to try this on-demand transit system. And just noting that 2 years was the longest that the VTA would award funding for. And noting that similar to our prior Palo Alto shuttle service, neither of them are federally funded. They're both local regional funded. So neither of them required complementary paratransit service, which is the requirement when you receive federal funding for transit. They're both locally funded. However, our new on-demand transit service will serve ambulatory and non-ambulatory passengers. So it will be able to take wheelchairs and will be able to serve those in a similar fashion to paratransit service, which is also an on-demand service. So actually our model is very, very similar to paratransit service, this new on-demand service model. Hopefully I answered all those questions.
Pat, you're muted.
Talking to myself, huh? So thanks, that's very helpful. The next item we have listed is on the railroad grade separations. And I think we've discussed that in previous meetings, and there's not any real updates that I am aware of since our last discussion. But the next item of youth mental health is certainly an important one as we're emerging from the impacts of the pandemic. I realize there's probably one additional bullet point that we may want to include here, which is YCS, Youth Community Services, and in particular, the YCI program, the Youth Connectedness Initiative, which is focused on peer-to-peer mental health support. And it's co-funded by a county grant. And then the city had thought that we would need to cut that. And that is actually, if I remember right, it's one of the programs that the council used this few discretionary dollars that they had at our last meeting to propose restoring. Is that correct, Mr. City Manager? Yeah. So we probably should even include that as YCS and YCI as one of the other ongoing youth mental health programs. YCS is more than just youth mental health, but and our the project safety net is something that we're in a process of that becoming an independent nonprofit, and I don't know whether our staff has an update of the status of that program, and because they're attempting to, in this era, respond to some of the enhanced youth mental health challenges resulting from the pandemic, as well as my understanding.
Director O'Kane can speak to the status.
Great.
Sure, thank you. I'm Kristen O'Kane, Community Services. So Project Safety Net has been successful in getting their 501c3
determination, they're also an independent corporation now. So they are up and running. They have a board of directors, and they also have some staff, same staff mostly who were working on Project Safety Net when they were under the city. The city contributes $100,000 towards Project Safety Net annually, and we are also offering them space at Cubberley when they do come back to the office. They're still responding to mental health crises, and also still serving as a resource and really a connector for different organizations and agencies. And right now they're focused on just ramping up financially, doing some fundraising, and trying to just get to, to that stable position of being a nonprofit. So I'm hopeful that they'll continue to grow and be successful. And I sit on the board as an ex officio member. So I'm a non-voting member, but still participate on the board.
And Kristen, that with the nonprofit status, was there with county support some expansion in their geographic scope as well? Is that correct?
Right. So one of the benefits, I think, of them not being under the city umbrella is they're able to expand. So they're really hoping to be more of a regional meaning the peninsula surrounding areas. Yeah, I would say, yeah, North County. I think that makes sense, Vice Mayor. So yeah, they're really focusing on expanding.
Great, thank you. And we just put as a bullet on district resources, and I know that the district has its own set of youth mental health initiatives, and maybe if either the superintendent or board members would like to just share anything on that, and so that we begin to look at what's the convergence and the total list of initiatives that we're doing and you're doing, and how we collaborate on them.
You know, one of the things that I'm sort of struggling to wrap my head around a little bit is because I think there's certainly maybe appetite on the school board to at least discuss, where we are in terms of programs that overlap, and at least discuss whether there's funding that is, a gap that can be filled. But for me, the sort of threshold to that question too, and I'm talking both about mental health and even if we look at the buses issue, it's like there is so much duplicative, or at least what may seem like duplicative work, that if you were to ask me, okay, the shuttle buses are no longer here, all the students who use the shuttle buses, what are we going to do with them? The sort of logical step for me isn't necessarily to say, let's fund the shuttle buses, but to say, let's see how we can, in a targeted fashion, expand our own school bus service, or otherwise serve those students with the infrastructure we have in place. And with mental health resources, it's the same thing. I mean, the district spends an incredible amount of money on mental health resources because it's one of our pillars, basically, of what we call the PAUSD promise. Mental health and wellness is one of the core principles of our district. And so we spend a lot of money, a lot of resources, and we have, partnerships with like organizations that have 24/7 concierge lines to help students and staff and families seek resources. So there's a lot there. And none of this is to say that Project Safety Net, the free shuttle buses, don't add value to us, because they certainly do. But I think the question I have is really, why does it make sense? And this is said in the best possible way, but fiscally, why does it make sense, or even logistically, for us to help to fund a city program that admittedly is broader in scope than just the students in the school district, when we may have parallel programs serving our students that maybe we direct some money to expand those out to cover the gap in services that might be lost. And that's just, to me, a very practical question. It has nothing to do with my desire to work with the city and, understanding that these are all our kids and we want to help them all. But that's sort of a practical hurdle for me.
Well, I think that's a really good point. And at the outset, a real purpose of just laying out this strategic relationship was simply to have a full understanding of what are the respective programs that we're doing, so that we then can rationalize how to be most efficient at those. And part of that is understanding where we may have duplication that could be using resources more efficiently, either through collaborating or just recognizing that something may be duplicative. You know, whether it's, we kind of in a program like the Children's Theater, we have up until grade 6, the Children's Theater is kind of the only theater program. And then in middle school and high school, there are also school programs in theater as well as teen programs of the Children's Theater. So yeah, I think there's a complexity there, and there's dual tracks, even if they're not exactly duplicative. But that was part of the intention here, is to start by just laying things out and understand those in a more comprehensive way, so that we then move toward more strategic collaborations.
Then, as a suggestion, my suggestion would be then, and this is really on our end, to take this document and for the next meeting, add in the sort of breadth of resources that we offer our students under mental health. We could even, you know, bullet point the geographic bus service for our students, if that helps sort of paint a mental map. And I think you're right. I think that would be helpful to see what, you know, we know what the city's doing because you've been very, very vocal about, you know, I mean, it's just, there's a lot of transparency there. I think it's harder to know what the district's doing if you're not in the district. And so I think it'll be, you know, all our district families, you know they have access to it, but obviously if you don't have a child in the district now, it's hard to see what that picture looks like. So I think that on our end, Dr. Austin, if we can add some bullet points to this list before the next meeting, you know, what are all our mental health resources that we're offering our families? And we can look through, you know, teen leadership program. That's more specific, as is recreation, but I think we could start with mental health and the bus.
Great. And the city manager, you want to weigh in?
Sure. I'd be happy to. I was just going to note that this actually parallels a conversation that the superintendent and I have been having as well. And I'll take a crack at this if you don't mind. Always dangerous to try to do graphics on a Zoom call. So the analogy I might draw was one of a concentric circle, where at fundament and the core here is exactly the conversation we're having right now. Just even understanding what the city's doing and what the district are doing in various areas, and then the perhaps the broader, a little larger conversation and has been touched on. Maybe we'll call it the uncomfortable one, is so who pays for it, and you know how do we resource those programs? But then, you know, ultimately, perhaps where we head with the conversation is really a discussion of outcomes. And what is it that we are, as a city, are trying to achieve in each one of these categories, if these are the right categories at all, but certainly a good way for us to organize the discussion to describe, again, what the city's doing in a particular area, what the district and the district is doing, and then, and again, how we resource it, and then really a little longer term discussion as to what is it we're trying to achieve with the programs that we offer in each of the categories for discussion, and then really question whether we're approaching it in the right way. Certainly want to minimize duplication and maximize coordination among the programs that we have. Then the really risky part on my graphic, my PowerPoint here, will be to acknowledge that there's a Venn diagram as well as Director Dara, you pointed out that on the one hand, we tend to assume that kids in Palo Alto and kids in PAUSD are one and the same. But the reality is that obviously not, and that the city provides a broader services to a broader constituency than district families as well. So we want to be mindful of that and also intentional as to what impact that has on the way that we structure our program. So I really do just want to reinforce the value of this conversation for us, and personally as a public administrator, thinking about the effectiveness of our own programs, how to ensure that any issues of duplication and coordination with what PAUSD are very intentional and very visible to all of us.
Great. Yeah, Jennifer.
So I think I've been struggling a little bit here, and I think it's because I have seen these as two separate conversations that I think were merged on us, that for months now we've been talking about making a list of the things we collaborate on, or that we want to create sort of a comprehensive list so that nothing falls through the cracks and we don't say, oh gosh, we never talked about that. What are all these different ways that we intersect or that one of us impacts the other one? So I'm thinking collaborations list, and suddenly it's flipped over into a budget discussion, which of course there's overlap there, right? Anything that we collaborate on or help each other out on has a financial impact, not everything, but a lot of them. And right now you guys are going through budget conversations. So it makes sense that would be coming up, but I want to make sure that we, at least I think that unless you guys had this intention from the beginning, but when we had our first meeting of this year, it was, hey, there's some stuff that we seem to have not discussed, and this is where it makes sense for it to sit. And let's make, like we have a board calendar that there's a 12-month calendar where certain things just come up in April of every year, December of every year. And I sort of imagine it was going to be this, that every year we're going to make sure we talk about middle school athletics, and every year we're going to make sure we talk about safe routes to school. And so I think that is a list that has to, that we benefit from making that list separate from the budget discussion, independently, even if budgets are never talked about again. But now you're talking about this funding thing, and I think that everyone who's spoken has brought up exactly what was on my mind, that Project Safety Net is a dearly beloved program that came into existence because of a fairly traumatic time in our town and continues to do amazing work. And we spend millions of dollars on mental health within the district already, right? So really being clear about what we're already doing, what these other organizations that forget that we fund, because we build our budget based on what we think we should be funding. But when we look at the things that you are funding, some of which directly support the district, many of which, as Ed just mentioned, support the community in general, which is so much bigger than just our district. What is the value add of those? And that's where I think a lot of tough conversations have to happen. But this committee benefits by having a better understanding of what the district already has in place. So I look forward to those conversations for sure. And I want to make sure that the collaboration list still stands on its own, separate from the budget stuff.
Right. And so at the outset, really when we began this process, and what I had really wanted to propose is that we begin to look at those strategic relationships and just understanding them, and in part to inform agendas of this committee, but really much beyond this committee's agenda, just the entire relationship. And the reason that we've needed to kind of bring in this other layer to the conversation is because the list that we had is really the list of what we used to do up until a year and a quarter ago, or a year ago. And so we're in this period where we really have two different discussions: what we've historically provided, what we're currently providing, and so there's this other more immediate layer that has been thrust upon us. And it's being, now that we're emerging from the pandemic and going into a second year of budget impacts from the pandemic, we're being forced to have this conversation that is basically a different conversation on what the city provides now versus what the city has historically provided. And I think it's really important that to the extent those things affect youth and families, that it's understood what we're not doing that we used to do and would like to do.
Well, this is a bonus then of a very challenging situation, because if there has been duplicative efforts or even wasteful spending, because you guys have been putting that money forth to support the district, and maybe it's in ways that we don't feel like we need, or is different, then this is a chance to have that conversation to make sure we're being as efficient as possible.
Righto. And even, and as we dive deeper in this beyond what we can today, for instance, in the Project Safety Net discussion, that's another set around youth mental health. And I'm aware of just how much more the district does today than they did, a half dozen years ago in this area, and that the district has really stepped up and embraced these issues. I would note that the initial and to some extent ongoing value of Project Safety Net is how it leverages all these other community resources, that it's a collaborative, and they're not really a provider of youth mental health as an entity. They convene and collaborate with these great community partners who do the great work themselves, or ideally those groups interact and collaborate with each other in specific focus areas, and that's a value to PSN that I think we want to keep on the table, is how they leverage resources as opposed to provide services. So I don't want to go too long today on going into the deep dive. I think that the follow-up of the district providing kind of what you're doing in these different areas. Board Chair Darp alluded to on the example of the objective of how do we get kids with transit to school who need that service to get to school effectively, is really the higher level conversation, as opposed to down into, is it necessarily restoring shuttles? So that's each one of these, I think, has a great opportunity to now say, oh yeah, what's the problem we're trying to solve, and are we going about it in the best ways? I think that could be a really valuable outcome to this conversation. We have the teen leadership programs. The district has far more teen leadership programs than the city does, in just a myriad of ways. This is another area where I think it would be useful to have a side conversation on what are the best strategies to do that, and how do our efforts, or how are they different and from what the district does, and are they complementary or independent? It's something that I think we should really be looking at. We've had some discussion previously about middle school athletics, and I think that that's an area that we should have a focused discussion on and going forward. How are we on the whole school playing field set of issues? That's probably one that our respective staffs can give us insight on. Is that all going well from each party's perspective, or are there things we might need to work on?
I'll ask Director O'Kane perhaps a comment for the city.
Sure. Thank you for that question. So we did extend the agreement that we have with the school district for maintenance of the school playing fields, and then the city also brokers those fields for rentals. I think that is going well. I think there's probably an opportunity the next time that agreement comes up for renewal to just take a closer look at it and see if there's anything either party wants to amend or revise. But I think right now it's going well.
Great. Good. And we touched on libraries, and really we have the libraries and community centers that for us are kind of merged somewhat. But we have a partial reopening of our libraries, and that's something that we really are struggling with. It's a valued community asset. Our city staff did polling of the community on a number of the budgetary issues, and the value of libraries went up higher, I think, than they've ever polled coming out of this pandemic. It's interesting. So we got kind of a sense of just what the community was valuing the most in the past when we've had budgetary polling. And this, I should say, it wasn't it was a selective response poll. So we don't know how representative it is across all the community, but it had a lot of participation. And my memory is that at this time, compared to the past, public safety still always scores extremely high in city core responsibilities. But a number of these other services scored equally high, or in the same ballpark, I should say. It's interesting how much things that the community had kind of taken for granted, or even said, well, that's kind of a perk of Palo Alto to have exceptional services in these areas. We're seeing a lot greater appreciation for the importance of them, and a lot of concern over diminishment or loss of some of those programs. So that was just a context there. But we on the maker space, I see under community centers, I don't recall whether that got specifically restored in the latest draft budget. Is that
yeah, I don't think that was ever cut. So okay, that great. Is, yeah.
Good.
That's still there.
And our drop-in teen center is still funded?
It is, but I believe it's in reduced number of days.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess as we're getting toward the end of our time slot, maybe we should just switch forward to how this item folds into the future meetings of the and future agendas, if that's okay, and maybe move on to item number 5 then. And so I guess the one follow-up was that the district's going to provide some filling in to this outline of different programs that they're providing in these categories that relate. You know, we're not looking to have a list of everything the district does and it's any more than this is everything the city does, but areas where we have crossover potential or collaborations that I think would be real valuable. Next, any specific next agenda items that folks would like to see? A vacation? Yeah. Good. So yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say on my end, nothing specific. I think that the list, you know, that is a good place to be for a discussion. I can't think of anything specific outside of that though.
Okay, great. And so I think we have one more of these meetings scheduled before our respective breaks, correct? I see Chantal affirming that. So that's on, let's just go ahead and, the date is put it tentatively on my calendar, the
17th?
17th, yes, thank you. Great. So does anyone have anything else before we adjourn? All right. Well, thanks everybody. And thanks to the public.
Thank you.
Thanks.